It's been 10 years since a young fruit seller in Tunisia set himself on fire in protest against police who beat him and seized his cart and produce. Mohamed Bouazizi died 18 days later, triggering outrage. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets to challenge the regime of Zine al-Abidine bin Ali. After 24 years of authoritarian rule, bin Ali fled the country on January 14, 2011. Saudi Arabia granted him refuge. Tunisia was left in turmoil. Eventually, protests spread beyond its borders. People in different countries across North Africa and the Middle East demanded regime change too. The movement became known the world over as the Arab Spring. In Tunisia, power automatically fell into the hands of bin Ali's Prime Minister, Mohamed Ghannouchi. But a day later, on January 15th, the Constitutional Council determined the then Speaker of Parliament, Fouad Mbazza, was the rightful acting president. He remained in office until Moncef Marzouki was elected president by the Constituent Assembly in December. Marzouki, an opposition leader who'd spent 2 decades in exile in Paris, remained in power for 3 years. So, what legacy did the uprising leave in Tunisia and the region? We'll find out more as we talk to the former Tunisian president, Moncef Marzouki, about the Arab Spring 10 years on. Your Excellency, former President of Tunisia, Moncef Marzouki, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. I want to start by asking you, 10 years now have passed since those historic events that not only erupted in Tunisia, but essentially had reverberations around the whole Arab world that captured the interest and the attention of the entire globe, in fact. Looking back at those 10 years, how do you assess them?
Well, first of all, thank you for this invitation. Yes, when I look back to this past decade, to try to understand what happened to Tunisia, what happened to the Arab world, what happened to me, I would say that I'm struck by 2 main ideas. The first is that, in fact, our revolution, the Arab revolution, they are normal revolutions because they follow what I call the 5 laws of revolutions. The first law is that every revolution has a human cost, a high human cost. Fortunately, here in Tunisia, we didn't pay that very much. The cost was not that high, but when I consider what happened in countries like Yemen, like Syria, like Libya, it's really awful. It's something terrible. The second law is that every revolution is followed by a counter-revolution. That's normal. That's what happened everywhere. And this is what happened in our countries. The third law is that revolutions don't profit to the people who were behind the revolution. And unfortunately, this is what happened here in Tunisia. A lot of people died, a lot of people were injured, but they didn't profit at all from the revolution. Other people profit from this revolution. And the fourth law would be a revolution is like a cat, eating her offspring. The front against dictatorship here in Tunisia broke out, and now the good guys were fighting together, side by side. Now are rivals and sometimes enemies. And the most important law is that it takes a long time, to achieve some of the objectives. Now, 10 years after the start of the revolution, unfortunately, we didn't achieve all our objectives, but this is quite normal. And the second idea is that our revolutions are paradoxical revolutions. The first paradox is that from the beginning, the very start, they were peaceful revolution, but they led to terrible civil wars in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. From the very start, they were secular revolutions, but they gave power to the Islamists. And the third paradox is that they were local revolutions, local phenomena, but they have led very, very soon, very quickly to be battlegrounds for foreign powers. So those characteristics, specific and general characteristics, you can understand what happened to this part of the world, and you can foresee also.
As somebody who, prior to the revolution, was known for their stance in terms of pushing for greater human rights, for greater civil liberties in Tunisia, and then who went on to use that principle to elevate yourself essentially as the first interim or the first president to be chosen by the people. How do you view those initial gains? Because, you know, as people, and I was a reporter covering the protests across the Arab world in 2011, there was such a high at the time amongst the people. You could almost feel it. You could almost hold it that there was a new beginning. 10 years on, do you, when that optimism is no longer there, do you view that it is dead, or as you're analyzing it now, that this is just some sort of a phase as the Arab world continues to change?
If we consider the situation in Tunisia, I am proud of the numerous achievements that we have realized during those 10 years. First of all, we are now a free nation. We have free elections. We have a free parliament. We have freedom of expression. We have freedom of gathering, etc., etc. And I can assure you that as a human rights activist, I was very extremely cautious about torture. I said from the beginning to the police and the army that I will never accept any kind of torture, and torture has stopped in Tunisia. Now you don't have torture in Tunisia, and this is very important. So I can also we have one of the best constitutions in the Arab world, even in the world, not only by what's inside this constitution, but because of the making of this constitution. You know, we have had more than 400 gathering meetings, 3 years of discussion, and the constitution was adopted by the people themselves. This was the first experience in the Arab world. So I can say that from the political point of view, we have achieved a lot. Of course, we didn't realize a perfect democracy. We still have fragile democracy. We still have even a corrupt democracy, but we have a democracy, and this is very important in the Arab world.
Sorry to interrupt here. I want to ask you, those are very important gains that you mentioned, but those gains were also, by the way, achieved in Egypt, for example. They made their own constitution, they had free elections, and they had an administration which was very vocal against torture. However, because of the counter-revolution, because of the lack of justice that was exerted on the former despots and those who governed Egypt, those gains, as you mentioned, as you described them very importantly, those fragile gains, they were overturned almost, you know, by night. Are you not worried that Tunisia, with all the foreign interference that is happening in it, and we'll go into that shortly after, are you not worried that those gains that you talk about could disappear also, you know, very quickly?
Absolutely, I agree totally with you. I agree totally with you. This is why I said we have democracy, but very fragile democracy. And now, at this very moment, you know, people are here in Tunisia are talking about coup. They are asking the military to intervene because we have a lot of economic problem, etc. I am very aware of this fragile situation, but I am also confident that here in Tunisia we have a lot of people who will defend the constitution. We will never accept a scenario like in Egypt. It's quite sure that we didn't achieve our social and economic objective, and this is the main problem. This is where we think that we have failed, because the revolution, the roots of the revolution were poverty and unemployment among educated youth, and those kind of problems we didn't solve them. Not only because the counter-revolution, but also because the situation, the economic situation in our country, in the world, etc. So what I am afraid of is that because of the economic situation, the counter-revolution would take pretext of this situation, you know, to say, hey, freedom of expression is very important, but it's very important for the elite. But for the people, what is the most important thing is to have jobs, and we are going to give the jobs, etc. And then, really, here in Tunisia, we are at risk of a coup like in Egypt. But once again, we have to battle for freedom. It's not, the game is not over. The game is very difficult, but the process is still going. And I do think that here in Tunisia, at least we can achieve our objective. Not very soon, but I do hope that in a few years to come, we will achieve not only the political objective, but also the social and economic objectives.
On the social and economic objective, obviously, one of the triggers, or the main trigger that came that ignited essentially the fire that was the protests in Tunisia was the death of Bouazizi, a merchant or a street vendor who set himself on fire out of desperation. Now, some people would have seen that act as coming from the economic desperation of people who weren't able to provide. Some will see it as an act of desperation because there was no freedom, the way he was reportedly humiliated by the authorities. There are many understandings, but one thing that is for certain, as you mentioned there, is that the economic situation in Tunisia remains one that is not very prosperous. Unemployment remains an issue. You have a young population. The productivity isn't so well. Add to that, one of the strengths of Tunisian society was its trade unions. However, we've seen over the past few years the trade unions being used, according to some people, by the counter-revolution to stop economic progress. Now, when we look at all the other economic support that some countries have had regionally, and you compare it to the economic support that Tunisia has had, you'll see that there is a big difference. So there's been billions of dollars that have been given to, for example, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi after he succeeded in the coup in Egypt. Why do you feel that there are, and you mentioned this, why do you feel that economically the counter-revolution, or rather the counter-revolution is using the economy to essentially thwart Tunisia's march towards fully fledged democracy?
Well, you are right. I think, of course, the main problem, as we have repeated many times, is the social and economic problem. But part of the problem comes from us, because we didn't succeed up to now to have a political stability. You know, in 10 years here in Tunisia, we have had 8 governments. Eight governments. For one government can last just sometimes less than 1 year. So when you have this kind of political instability, you cannot build up a political economic system, because everybody would say, let's wait for the next government before investing money and so forth. So this is our problem. We have to deal with our problem. We have to have this political stability. And the second, and you are also right when you talked about the support of Western government to Sisi and not to Tunisia. And this is really heartbreaking. You know, this was my first disillusion about the Western government, because I saw from the beginning, when I was at the head of the state, that they were not keen, they were not interested in promoting democracy in Tunisia, contrary to what they have done in Eastern Europe. It was quite clear for me that they didn't see our revolution as the triumph of democracy, but they saw this revolution as the triumph of Islamism. And this was not true, because it was really the triumph of democracy. And even the Islamists, you know, they were part of this democratic process, but the Western government didn't say, no, they are Islamists, they are, we have to throw them away.
You are head of states, and you are head of states, and you are not an Islamist.
No, but the fact that there were Islamists in the government and that the Nahda was the first party, this was unacceptable for for the Western mind. For the Western mind, you cannot be an Islamist, you cannot be a Democrat if you are Islamist. And this is not true, because I tried to explain to many foreign leaders, to François Hollande and to Angela Merkel, look, you have in your country Christian Democrats. So why can't we have also in the Arab world some Islamists who are becoming Democrats? We Democrats, we didn't become Islamists, but the fact that Islamists became Democrats, so we have to accept them, and they want to be part of the game. So why do we reject them? But for the French, mainly for the French people, you know, the French mind, they cannot accept that you can be an Islamist and a Democrat. I do believe that we have to take them on board, because if you leave them out, if you say just they are all terrorists, etc., they will become terrorists.
Regionally speaking, Dr. Moncef, who do you believe is behind the instability that you have witnessed in Tunisia?
But of course, we have. First of all, we have our deep state, because you know when you take over, when you become the head of state, you can the head of the old state, and the old state, the bureaucracy is there, and so in fact you don't control anything, because the deep state is there, and the deep state was our most important enemy. And then you have the outside enemy, and this outside enemy, you do know who is it. I named the Emirates. The Emirates working probably for something else, because the Emirates are representing the old Arab political system, was afraid of those revolutions. They have done everything, you know, to sabotage the transition here in democracy. They have put a lot of money in corrupt media. They have put a lot of money in corrupt political parties. And I can say that they hijacked our democracy. And this is why the Counterrevolution has come to power. And this is why mainly the main component of the government currently is in the parliament and in the government is the Counterrevolution. This is why the situation is extremely complex.
When you were president, did you try and reach out to the United Arab Emirates or those other countries that were fueling the Counterrevolution?
Yes, I did. I met with the foreign minister and even with Bin Zayed himself in one summit. I don't remember which one. And I told them, look, revolution is our own problem. We are trying to solve our own problems. We're not interested in exporting our revolution. But of course, they knew that even if I am sincere, they knew that this revolution would be exported. And this is why they have done everything. And they are doing now everything, you know, to stop this.
So if you don't mind, when you were speaking with Abdullah bin Zayed or Mohammed bin Zayed?
Yes, with Abdullah bin Zayed and even with Mohammed bin Zayed.
And
yes.
when you spoke to them, did you ask them what it was, what they were interested in with regards to Tunisia? What was their justification for the stances that Abu Dhabi has been taken?
They didn't have any justification. They just watched me, you know, as I was a curious person, you know, but they didn't even respond to me, because I think they have decided, made up their mind that this revolution should be stopped everywhere, and mainly in Tunisia, because it was the starting point. But I can assure you that they are going to fail everywhere. But 10 years now after the beginning of the revolution, of course, we didn't achieve our objectives. But I can assure you that also the Counter-Revolution didn't achieve theirs too. Even in Egypt, you know, they are trying to go back to the, you know, to the 50s, but they are not able to go back to the 50s. You cannot stop the flow of history. This is what I am sure of.
In the beginning of this interview, you identified 5 elements that make a revolution. One thing that you may have missed out, if you don't mind, is that for successful revolutions, there needs to be a cost to the previous regime. So you will either find that people were either imprisoned or beheaded or exiled. In Iran, you had it. In France, you had it, and so forth. One of the criticisms of the uprisings of 2011, the Arab Spring, was that all the regimes that existed before, bar Libya, the heads of states were allowed to live on. In fact, they actually probably lived a better life than they did before. With regards to Tunisia, you had Ben Ali given, although he was exiled, he was essentially given protection by the Saudis who still continued. Do you believe that for the revolutions to eventually succeed, there needs to be a cost exerted on the previous regimes and on the deep states?
The second law, I told you that the second law, that after a revolution, you have always a counter-revolution. You have always a counter-revolution. Whatever you do, I think you can jail them, you can jail, you can kill, you can do everything, but you will have a counter-revolution, because this is the normal process, you know, before a society reaches its equilibrium. Would have been better choice, to send thousands of people to jail in Tunisia. I doubt, personally, I doubt that would have been make any difference. Also, don't forget that where I come from, I don't come from the military. I don't come from I come from the human rights field, and many of my colleagues, whether Islamists or secular, we have been harassed by the regime. We have been, exiled. We have been put in jail, etc., etc. So we didn't really want to make the same error. We said, look, we are trying to do, let's try to be, because it is a peaceful revolution, let's try to behave in a different way.
But the counter-revolution took advantage of your peacefulness.
Yes, sure, it took advantage, and this is why. But I do think that we didn't reach the good equilibrium, between repression and between our human rights values. Maybe it was an error, but I do think that because we were a peaceful revolution led by human rights activists, what we have done maybe was an error, but I'm not sure that if it was otherwise, it would have been much successful, because once again, you have all the counter-revolution, whatever you do.
Dr. Moncef, I see behind you the flag of Palestine. When you look at 10 years from the Arab Spring, and you see now these latest normalization deals that are taking place between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and possibly even Saudi Arabia in the future, do you think that there is a link between the countries who are normalizing with Israel, and do you think it's just a coincidence, rather, that the countries normalizing with Israel are the very same countries that have been pushing the counter-revolutions and suppressing the Arab Spring?
No, it's not a coincidence, but it's, and the link is obvious. The link is obvious because all those regimes were and still are extremely afraid of the Arab Revolution, because they know that if they have got this Arab Revolution in their own country, it will be the end. And this is why they did everything they could to fuel the counter-revolution. Now, how do I understand the normalization? I think it's the price that those regimes are giving, mainly to the United States and to Israel, to be protected not only from Iran, but also from the Arab Revolution. So it's the price. They are protecting themselves, and they are doing everything to fuel the counter-revolution everywhere, to stop the revolution where it can start, and also to let the Palestinian cause be forget by the Arab nation. So the link is obvious. It's no mystery. But I would say that those regimes, they dare do this normalization because they are no longer afraid of their public opinion. And this could be a major error, because all the dictatorship, they never consider that they have a population, they have a public opinion, and they think that they are dealing, with the sheeps. And then they can be very, very much surprised by the weight of their public opinion. So I am not sure that the situation of the leaders of Bahrain or Saudi Arabia is very easy.
I want to end with the final question, which is, we are now going after, on this 10-year mark, obviously the role of the United States can't be understated within the Arab world. There is a new administration that is about to take office. In fact, maybe just 5 days before the anniversary, the 10th anniversary of the Egyptian revolution on January the 25th. If you have a message to that new administration and the incoming president-elect Joe Biden, what message would that be as somebody who is seen as a symbol of the Arab revolutions?
I will say to the President Biden what I said to him when I met him in 2014. At the time, I told him that the revolutions in the Arab world are democratic revolutions, and it's very important for them to get the support of the United States. And I was very shocked because the Western government were not giving enough support, economic support, political support to this revolution, etc. And I remember that he was very, very interested I think that he was open. I still believe that maybe he won't change much of the US policy towards Israel, but I hope that he would put a lot of pressure on the Egyptian regime, on the Saudi regime, only to release the political prisoner, because this would be the first step. So if the US administration would do this necessary step, maybe they will regain some respect and some confidence from the Arab world. Otherwise, if they still, put the pressure only on the democratic government and support Israel and do nothing with the Egyptian regime, I think once again they will miss an opportunity, to regain confidence and respect among the Arabs.
Dr. Moncef Marzouki, former president of Tunisia, thank you very much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.